In this presentation, we will talk about the Common European Framework for Reference, or CEFR, relative to our work as item writers with global assessments. In Part 1, we will provide you with an overview of the CEFR and how it has informed language instruction and assessment around the world. In Part 2, we will look in more detail at how the CEFR scales ability across different levels of ability and consider how this is reflected in item writing. In Part 3, we will look in greater detail at how the CEFR is integrated into work by global assessments. Finally, in Part 4, we will consider how this works in practice and look at examples of how the CEFR shapes our item development work in practice. In this section, we consider the aims and purpose of the CEFR. The CEFR was first published in 2001 and extended in 2018. Like language itself, the CEFR is not a static document, but is continually evolving and being adapted in accordance with research. It is more than likely that you will have come across it before in a range of different contexts. It is widely used in teaching and assessment contexts. It provides a description of language ability across different levels from beginner to proficiency. However, it is much more than just a set of proficiency scales. It focuses on what candidates are typically able to do according to different skills, contexts, and ability levels. It provides both holistic scales, that is, language competency at a generic and overarching level, and atomistic scales, that is, focusing on ability according to different skills, such as reading or writing, or sub-skills, such as fluency or pronunciation, or other non-linguistic features of communicative competence, such as pragmatic competence or interactive ability. Although there is a lot of interesting research on the extent to which features such as pragmatic competence or appropriacy judgments can be standardized across different languages and cultures, it is important to note that the CEFR is not just limited to English. This means we can compare language ability levels across different languages and have a fair idea of what a language user can do. Finally, the CEFR is descriptive rather than prescriptive in nature. This means that it's a set of observations based on what candidates can typically do. There will, naturally, be variation, and progression will not necessarily be linear or logical. The CEFR, therefore, aims to enable language teaching and testing professionals to talk about their work in a more standardized and systematic fashion. When designing language courses, or designing tests, or producing textbooks, they are able to talk more easily about what is meant by different ability levels. There is therefore a common meta-language that is familiar to all. Simple numbers are much limited in that regard. For example, stating that candidate X has completed the English language curriculum for Year 5 in country Y gives little information about what their language ability actually is to anyone who is not from that country. Whereas, saying Year 5 equates to CEFR level B1 is far more useful in that regard. Part of the problem is that language ability is difficult to quantify, define, and measure in the first place. Naturally, we measure many things, for example height, weight, or temperature, every day. Pause the video now for 1 minute and write down as many different units of measurement as you can think of. The chances are you included measurements such as miles, kilograms, or centimeters. The difference here is that everyone can agree on what a mile is. Everyone agrees what a kilogram is. However, language ability is much more nebulous because it cannot be physically observed or directly measured. It is therefore known as a latent trait. For this reason, language testing has sometimes been referred to as a rubber ruler. Measurement can be variable, and therefore less reliable, unless standardized benchmarking is in place. Here you can see how benchmarking works in practice. Etymologically, the word comes from the days when builders and carpenters would make physical marks on wood or stone in order to ensure consistency in their measurements. Today, it has a much broader meaning, and you can see here how by using the CFR, you can compare scores across a range of different tests from different countries around the world. Unless you work in Japan, for example, you may mistakenly believe that grade 1 is the lowest score in the ICON test. Benchmarking against the CFR helps to resolve any such confusion. In this section, we will consider individual sections of the CEFR in greater detail and look at how competency develops across different levels. This is the CFR in its basic visual, and you'll already be well acquainted with this. As you can see, it ranges from A1 to C2 levels, with various breakdowns and categorizations of ability in between. This is the CFR global scale. You do not need to read this, but you can see that this is the global scale. It is describing overall ability at a general or holistic level. We will now take a look at individual levels in more detail. This is the global scale for A1. We have highlighted a section of the text in red. As you can see, it uses adjectives such as familiar, basic, and concrete. Later, we will look at how this translates into features such as task design and item specification. At B2 level, on the other hand, you can see adjectives such as complex, abstract, and technical. This means that as we progress up the scales, language users, or for our purposes, test takers, are expected to be able to deal with less familiar and more abstract themes. It is very important that we balance these requirements as item writers. Tasks targeted at the B2 level cannot be overly rooted in the personal domain, even if the theme is appropriate. In a listening text, for example, we cannot write a script where someone discusses a level-appropriate topic, such as literature, relative only to their own personal experiences. There is an element of more specialist knowledge and abstract understanding that's required. In this section, we will consider more specifically how the CFR influences our assessment products and services. As we have seen, the CFR is a very useful tool for the purposes of benchmarking. Most tests are retrospectively aligned to the CFR. This means that such tests, including the associated specifications, tasks, and rating scales, are internally validated according to their own independent standard setting procedures. The alignment against the CFR takes place after this accordance with the necessary research. At global assessments, our approach is more a priori in nature. Take a moment to read this quotation from the Aptis Technical Manual. In other words, the CFR is used as the starting point for the development of our assessment products, including Aptis. For example, the equals core inventory was also produced by the Council of Europe, and this provides the basis of how we give level-appropriate linguistic exponents and topics. You will be provided with further information on this in due course. In this final section, we will take a look at more specific examples of how the CFR is used in our work. Examples of how we encounter the CFR in our work include candidate score reporting, standard setting specification, design, test structure, item naming, and item writing tools. In terms of item naming, for example, we might simply call our task Listening A2, or, where multiple tasks exist for an individual level, Listening B1A or Listening B1B. Candidate score reporting is another example of where we observe the CFR. In the visual, you can see, for example, a CFR skill profile from a candidate score report. As well as a breakdown of the numeric score, candidates also know how this translates into a CFR level. This is for each individual component that the candidate has taken, as well as an overall score. You can also see the influence of the CFR within our test specifications. The task specifications always state the required lexical level. This is known as the K level. If a word is K1, it means that it's amongst the first 1,000 most frequently used words in English. K2 means that it's within the next set of 1,000 most frequently used words, and so on. While frequency does not always equate to ease, the K levels, nevertheless, correspond to CFR levels as depicted in the table. Here, you can see examples of grammatical exponents appropriate at different levels. As mentioned, this list is based upon the Council of Europe's core inventory. Take a moment to pause the video to see if you can recognize which levels these exponents might be appropriate for. On the left, you can see grammatical exponents appropriate at A1 level. These include simple verb forms and simple connectors. On the right are exponents appropriate at B2 level. Following this guidance allows us to produce text at appropriate levels of complexity. You will be provided with the full lists and guidance in due course. Here, you can see a sample reading text for A1 level. In accordance with CFR guidance, it is firmly rooted in the personal domain. The text is a letter. The writer, Jerry, is talking only about his own experiences. All sentences refer to concrete and everyday situations. The grammar is simple, and the vocabulary is within the aforementioned K1 range. Here, by contrast, is an extract from a B2 text. This is a paragraph matching task. This particular extract is paragraph 5 from the actual text. The heading, which the test taker needs to select from a randomized sample, is The Difficulties of Living in Space. Take a moment to pause the video and reflect on the CFR features which makes this B2 level. The first point is obviously that the linguistic elements such as the grammar and vocabulary are more advanced now. Apart from this, the key information is integrated across sentences. Neither difficulty or living in space, the key words in the paragraph heading, are directly referenced. It is not possible to get the key simply by reading a single word or by word matching. Choosing the correct paragraph heading, therefore, relies upon having understood the paragraph as a whole. Thank you for your attention. For further reading, we recommend looking at the Aptis Technical Manual, the Core Inventory, the CFR Companion Volume, and even the CFR itself. It is clearly a central document for the work we do with global assessments as item writers. We will, of course, provide links to these texts.